close and pick it up.
Gotcha. Well, hey, at least you got it. So that's the
I
good
got it.
news.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Thank you
you
very
may
much.
need some longer cables.
I've got long cables.
Cool. Okay, then you're good.
Yeah.
The ones I had, I had a 25 footer, but we use it at the museum all the time. And I got an event next Saturday, which is why I won't be there in Hilliard. So, and they will request it being used. I have a feeling. So, in fact, I know. So. Anyway, if you're good, you're good.
Okay.
I hope everybody has a great time.
Yeah, it's attendance is pretty sparse this year.
Oh, really?
Yeah. A lot of people had conflicts, which is unusual, and a lot of people just people like John Folsoms. I haven't heard from him. So
well, for some reason next week seems to be the week when everybody wants to do everything.
Yeah,
I don't know what the deal is.
People complained about it being on Mother's Day last year, so
right.
You can't please everybody. Whatever, it'll be a good time.
I'm sure you will have a good time.
Yeah.
I will miss not being there. I'm sorry I can't, but
we'll catch you next year.
I'll be there. At least I'll try to. Okay. If I'm not dead or something.
Yeah, that's at
our age, that's a big deal. Yeah. Well, you just never know. I mean, So, and that's one of the big problems we got is we need some younger people. So in case we all do drop dead.
Yeah, and people are dropping dead.
I know. Very scary.
Yeah.
I'm trying not to be one of them, but you just never know.
Me too. Me too.
Always my goal for the day.
Yeah. My goal is to wake up tomorrow.
Exactly. Well, I just had my 80th birthday.
Oh, wow.
So I'm getting toward the end of the game.
He's 80.
Yeah.
Well, I'll be 70.
I'm hoping for another 10 years.
Well, I hope you do. I'll be 76 in June, and I'm planning on another 10 years, but I don't get to do the rule book. So
you don't exactly. Let's see, what is 5 after? We've got 40 people on. You want to go ahead and get started, Dave?
Sure. Let's do it. Go ahead.
Okay. Well, welcome everybody to the April meeting of the Early Television Foundation community. I had a problem. I think we can work around it, but I went to put I'm at the museum now, and I put my phone in the tripod holder we have, and it died. And I've pushed every button on it, every combination of buttons on it, and it's completely dead. So that's what I use for, showing stuff that's in the museum. So as a backup, I'm using the museum's computer, but I'm stuck at the desk. So maybe I could just share a picture of the gadget of the set when we get to that point. Anyway, let's get started. Dave, you want to make your courtesy announcement?
Yeah, well, just the usual. Good Zoom etiquette. Please keep your microphones muted to keep the audio chaos to a minimum, unless, of course, you have a question, in which case you're welcome to jump in with a question. When we get through with the formal presentation, we'll have a freewheeling discussion, and you can all have your microphones open then and make as much noise as you like.
Okay, that sounds good. Start the meeting off with some sad news. Cliff Benham, who those of you that have been coming to the convention probably know. Cliff has been, I don't know how many, he came to virtually, I think every convention we've had going back years and years. And he got very ill a few months ago and deteriorated after that. To the point that he was, I guess about a month ago, he was seeking hospice care, but there weren't any facilities near him that had space. So Nick Williams, who also many of you know, the guy that we're hoping someday will be rebuilding picture tubes, lived nearby, had an empty house, and said, you can come live with me, which I thought was awfully kind of him. Well, anyway, Cliff passed away, I guess a couple of weeks ago. I just heard about it yesterday. He was the country's expert on mechanical color sets, the CBS system and others like it, and was responsible for restoring a number of the color wheel sets we have at the museum. And every year when he came out to the convention, he would work on getting them going again. And he also did a bunch of innovative projects with building modern versions of them. But Cliff was a really good guy, and I'm really going to miss him. So, Dave, you said you had some pictures you could.
I just put I ran the pictures up while you were.
Oh, you did. I'm sorry, I'm on the wrong screen. Okay.
Yep. Just we lost a huge friend of the early television community. I think Cliff was probably the only one who knew how to keep all the spinning wheel TVs running anymore. So we're in trouble.
Yes, right. Yeah, I'm one of the things I'm doing now is going through the museum and getting stuff working that hasn't worked since last year. And today I started on the mechanical color sets. So I hope I have some success. Would anybody else like to say something about Cliff, memories you have of him? Love to hear you.
And Cliff had worked in broadcasting for quite a number of years. He worked for one of the PBS stations, most recently in the southern Pennsylvania area. And he was an expert not just with the mechanical color sets, but also with all of the antique color sets. And it's, I guess you can tell by the tremor of my voice, it's quite a shock, Steve.
Yeah, we'll really miss him. Anybody else have any remembrances, comments?
Yeah, I'd like to echo the sentiment that he was just a great guy. And I really appreciated that he not only restored the historical stuff, but the experiments he did with building new systems with different color wheels and so forth were just fascinating, and he'll be missed.
Anyone else want to chime in?
Yeah, I'll just say a few words here. I prevailed upon Cliff a number of years ago to come down and speak to our DC SMPTE section. And he not only spoke, he brought a lot of his gear down and did a demonstration for us there at our meeting at the NAB headquarters. Very well received. I know a lot of the younger people, especially, who had no conception of field sequential color. They were just totally blown away by the exhibit. And it was so nice of him to make the trip all the way down and bring all this stuff. I know we helped him pack it in his car to get back, but he did bring a lot of stuff with him. So still think about that meeting. That was one of our better, more successful meetings.
Well, I guess we'll move on. It's a sad note to start this on. I was looking forward to seeing Cliff. He also, one of the things that I guess somebody mentioned just now about his experimentation with modern stuff. A few years ago, I restored a 1952 RCA CPA color prototype. It was the precursor of NTSC. And it required a bunch of custom circuits that and there were things like, hey, I needed drivers for various things and sync separators and Cliff designed probably 6 different circuit boards that went into that thing. He was a genius.
I can mention one quick story which always tickled my imagination there. We a number of years ago, we were fortunate enough to have a fellow named Stan LeBar come to our early television convention. And for those of you who don't recognize that name, Stan was the guy who managed the project for what I consider to be the most important video event in history, which was the live transmission of the astronauts landing on the moon for the first time. So he was quite an unknown celebrity, but not within our circles. He was a big deal. And when he showed up at the museum, Steve gave him a tour through the museum. And when he got to Cliff's section, I know Cliff was a little nervous about meeting such somebody that he looked up to so strongly like that. And when Stan met Steve, he stuck his hand out and said, when Stan met Cliff, he stuck his hand out and he said, "You're Cliff Benham? I've been wanting to meet you." And I don't think Cliff ever fully recovered from that. That was pretty amazing to him that he got his reputation preceded him that much to that particular guy. And I know that always tickled pink. He was always tickled pink about that. Anyway.
Well, my phone just came alive suddenly, so maybe by the time I'm finished giving the museum report, I can log on with it, and we can do what we were planning on doing. Big news of the museum, of course, is the convention next weekend. We frantically getting ready. We've had a bunch of help getting things ready, and we're in good shape for it. The facility is ready. We got our catering lined up. So we're ready to go. If you're planning to come or would like to come, we still got room for you, but go on our website and register so we know, because Monday I have to tell the caterer our numbers for lunch and for dinner. So planning on going and you hadn't registered yet, do it this weekend, if you would, please. We're up to almost 170 members now. We've been picking up members as people have registered for the museum. A good number of them have decided to become members, which is really nice. And that's about, oh yeah, the other thing I wanted to mention is the sweepstakes. I got a report from Dave Arlen today that the cabinet restoration of the TRK-5 that's going to be our prize for the sweepstakes is going to be ready in time for the convention. Dave will be bringing it over with him. It'll be on display here. And hopefully I'll have it set up in time so we can sell tickets then. If not, it'll be shortly after that, but people will have a chance to see the set while they're here. This guy who's doing the restoration has done work for a number of people in the collecting community, and everybody raves about him. So I'm really looking forward to seeing it. Let's see. Let me see if I can get on here. With my phone.
Steve, I had a quick question, if I may.
Yeah.
This was wondering, do we have speakers for the convention?
we have two speakers this year.
Uh-huh.
We have one of those, Matthew Desario, who's actually they're both board members, are going to be is going to be making a presentation about his system he's built for displaying, taking, I guess, over-the-air digital channels and converting them and putting them in formats so his old sets can see them. And then we have a presentation by Mike Molnar. I'm trying to remember the name of it. Mike, you're not on, are you?
I am. You got me there?
Well, hey, good to see you.
Hi.
Why don't you tell us about it?
It's a presentation that's based on an article that I wrote called "When Television Was Just Around the Corner," which was something that during the late 20s and early 30s, every time a great experiment with mechanical television would get public attention, the first thing everybody would say is, well, television is just around the corner.
Yeah.
So that's what I'll be talking about.
Sounds like it'll be fascinating. Yeah, whoops. Almost there, I think. There we go. Can you find me, Dave, on my phone? It should be Steve M, I think. That's my that's the computer feed. Well, I see myself on the phone. Dave, can you see me? There I am. I'm Steve. That'll work. Do you have my audio now?
It says your network bandwidth is low, whatever that means.
That makes no sense. But can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Oh, okay, great. Well, then let me go back and I won't use the stand, so it's going to be a little bit shaky. But I'm going to talk about the really sort of unique set, the Crosley Swing-O-View.
Your phone audio is not on.
Is there audio?
This must
Yes,
be
Steve,
like
we're
the
see-
early days of TV when it almost worked, but not quite.
Yeah, we're seeing your video, Steve, but the audio is not coming through at all.
Trouble east of Denver.
He's probably saying it's okay on this end.
He might not be hearing us, but his phone microphone is muted. That's quite a Crosley anyway. And I'm from Cincinnati.
Beautiful set.
Steve's giving a lecture and we do not hear him. Can we get his attention?
Can anybody telephoning?
Okay, I'm back. Well, let's go ahead with James O'Neill's presentation. This is fascinating. It's going to be about the development of
what I do first.
Excuse me?
Ready for me?
I'm ready for you. Go for it.
Okay. Yes. Well, thanks for having me back. This is sort of a corollary, I guess you might call it, to a presentation I did some time ago on kinescope recording. This time is about getting video in real time to the early TV stations. And let me bring up the PowerPoint here. Okay. And let me go full.
Share screen.
Okay, got to share. Where to share screen? Where do I hit share screen? There's share. No, hold on. My engineer here is talking me through. We've got a little problem. Bear with me, please. Right there. Let me get out of this. Okay. Now I think we're there. Yeah, okay, let's go. And how'd I get share? Okay. Now can everybody see that? And let me get into slideshow mode and go full.
Yes, we have it, Jim.
Okay, now we're full screen with my title slide. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, so let me get the show on the road here. Yeah, as I've said, this is sort of a corollary to a presentation I did on getting video to the early television stations in less than real time, sending it out by the mails, by Railway Express, by buses. There was no FedEx back then, no overnight delivery. And back in the early days of television, yeah, just like radio, the big cities had it all over the small towns, the small markets, because they had access to a lot of talent, not only on air talent, they had directors, they had script writers, they had scenics designers, set builders. You just didn't have in small markets. I'm talking television. But this was the same thing that existed in radio, 20, 25 years earlier, when radio started to take off in the early 20s. Yes, there was a tremendous draw of the population to radio and later to television just because it was a novelty, it was something new. But obviously you can't sustain something just because it's a novelty. People get tired unless there's something new, there's something enticing, there's something there they want to listen to or they want to see. And I recall this so well as a kid watching one of the the first television station in our area. They did not have a hard connection to any of the networks. And to fill time occasionally, they would just poke a camera out the window, play some music in the background, and you had movement, you had the traffic going by on the highway. And I worked with a fellow, he said, we were fortunate enough to be located downtown in a hotel with our station, our studios, and next door there was a big department store. And when we had nothing else to put on the air, we would wheel a camera out the door, down the sidewalk into the department store, lock it down in front of the escalator. And of course, this is movement. People are coming down. The department store liked it because people could see themselves on the television sets in the entertainment department of the department store. But again, a little of that goes a long way. So you really got to look into the big cities for the programming, and you need to get this out to the small markets. Just to show how big the problem was after the war, there's a graph here. You may take issue with some of the numbers. I only numbered 2 of the graphs. I know these to be accurate. 1947, the year I was born in, I looked at 4 different sources for the number of TV stations on the air at the end of the year, either operating on a construction permit, operating on a license, special temporary authority, instead of a construction permit. And these numbers are fairly close, I think. So you went from just a handful of stations, literally, you could count on one hand almost in 1945, up just 6 years later, you've got 107 stations on the air, even with this freeze on new applications that happened toward the end of this 1948 on past 1951. So yeah, you had a lot of television stations and they were desperate for programming. Here's a quick rundown. 47, as I said, there were 13 operating on STA, Special Temporary Authority. There were 6 fully licensed stations. There were 54 more CPs that the FCC had issued and 72 applications for CPs pending. Before 1948 was over, you can read this like me, CPs issued stations on the air totaled 140. Now again, not everybody's on the air. These are construction permits as well as active stations. And at the end of 48, television was available in 64 cities in 31 of the 48 states. That is a meteoric takeoff in growth for a new medium. But again, you needed quality programming. There's a lot to television, a lot more than radio, and it cost a lot to do this, especially on a quality level in a big production, as you see here back in the 40s at NBC. But again, as I said, the only way to get this out to the stations in the boonies, even in the larger markets, was by Kinescope. This is NBC's Kinescope department in New York. Very busy, as were the other networks operating at the time, shooting the video off the television screens with the special cameras, taking a negative, then striking positive prints, getting these things shipped out. It said that collectively, in a month's time there in New York City, the network Kinescope operating consumed something like 5 million feet of film, and I don't doubt it. Actually, First Network began rather early in television. This was a 2-station network. This was what became WNBT in New York when it went commercial in 1941. The experimental call, of course, W2XBS, another experimental station in Schenectady, General Electric station, W2XB, which became licensed commercially as WRGB. They wanted a little bit of diversity of programming, so they erected on a mountain out from Schenectady a big rhombic antenna, 180-foot supports, and pulled in New York television over the air a distance of 129 airline miles and relayed it with their Schenectady transmitter to to Schenectady, Troy, and on to Albany. 1-station network, but it was the first evidence, the first indication of television networking, at least between 2 stations. Here's a picture of the antenna, the big rhombic. As I said, these supports were like 180 feet tall. And it was said that the signals were usable 85% of the time. Of course, you had low band V, you had some QRM, natural noise lightning. You had also fading. So 85% of the time you had usable video, according to the people who worked with us back then. And 85% may sound high, but you do an analysis with the nines, like I became used to in engineering. We strive for 5 nines. That's 99.99% available. That works out to a downtime of 864 milliseconds a day, a little over 6 seconds a week, or no more lost than 5 minutes, 5.25 minutes per year. But you look at 90%, I said 85, I didn't figure it for that, I figured it for 90, a little better availability. That's 1 9. That amounts to nothing happening, or a loss of signal for over a month, 36.5 days a year. So obviously that's not going to work on a commercial basis. You just can't have that sort of non-reliability. So we go to the Bell system, American Telephone Telegraph, long lines. They've been relaying audio across the country since the early 1910s, when they licensed DeForest Audion tube, turned it into a respectable amplifier, and began a long distance service coast to coast. And when the radio situation broke there in the 20s, they were there to help the radio broadcasters. First networking I've been able to find and substantiate was in January of 1923, just a few years after KDKA started broadcasting near the end of 1920. This was a networking of 2 stations also, WEAF in New York and WNAC in Boston. Just another few years later, NBC was established. Then a little less than a year after that, Columbia Broadcasting, Bill Paley, bought the Columbia Gramophone Radio Network, which it was called then, turned it into the Columbia Broadcasting System. And by 1928, very rapid escalation here, you had the first transcontinental radio network. NBC had hooked up a group of stations out on the West Coast as affiliates, and they were tied back with the operation headquarters in New York. So AT&T made all of this possible by relinquishing these telephone lines, which were already there. This gives you an overview of what things look like a little later in the game, 1934. This is just how well developed this connectivity for radio stations were to deliver the 5 kilohertz tariffed audio. Practically nowhere in the country you couldn't call, place an order if you had an NBC, CBS affiliation, whatever, and get the service delivered right to your test board and to your station. So yeah, it was a big thing. It was easy because we know audio is a lot easier to move around than video. By the way, this is a picture also from 1934. It shows how well developed the AT&T Long Lines Broadcasting Division had become. This is the New York Operations Center. These people are monitoring these feeds, making sure they get on the right trunk, they go to the right station, right part of the country, because you didn't always use the same pair of wires to go from one point to the other. Sometimes you wanted to go one way, sometimes you wanted to go to the other. Maybe maintenance was being done, or you had a line failure, but they were there to move things around and make it happen. And they did a darn good job of it for radio. Well, that was an expensive proposition. I'm quoting here from Lud Sibley, who several years ago, AWA Review did an excellent article on, I don't know whether you can see this or not. Let me go back. Okay, my wife is saying, no, it's blurring out. Sorry about that. In the AWA Review, 1989, if you can get a copy of that, read it, because Lud did a heck of a job. He's a former telephone engineer, former AT&T employee, did a very good job of documenting what went into this telephone radio network service. But to do this, it was expensive. You had to take a telephone line permanently out of service from regular telephone use, where they ran multiple calls over it. And he points out the amount of copper, just unbelievable, just to go the short distance, a little less than 600 miles between Omaha and Denver. You're looking at 255 tons of copper that had to be melted, drawn out into 165 mil diameter wires of standard phone company cables. And it took 47,000 insulators to support this 585 mile pair between these two cities on the cross arms. And you needed repeaters, depending on the type of wire you used, you needed repeaters either every 50 or 100 miles along the way. And of course, these things needed adjustment from time to time. Temperature could throw things off, humidity, rain on the line. So yeah, it was a big proposition, but apparently it was very profitable because they kept doing it and they kept adding service and adding service. Just to give you an idea here of where things were in the 1930s, these are some cable attenuation figures. These are phone company numbers, cable types, loading on the cable. You see what happens 50 miles with this one particular cable, 50 kilohertz, 5 kilohertz, you're totally off the grid there, 30 dB of loss. You look at some of the better cables, even wet and dry figures, 10 kilohertz, that's about all you could expect. So obviously you're not going to do electronic video. You might have gotten away with mechanical video that Bell experimented with back in the 20s, but this is not going to work for television, modern television, electronic television. So got to do something better. Well, also in the 1930s, Bell was experimenting with a lot of things, one of them being coaxial cable, which had come out of the Bell labs back in the 20s. They were not looking at hauling around television signals with coax. Actually, they were looking at a better way of carrying large groups of telephone conversations. And somebody did decide, hey, television is coming. A guy named M.E. Strebe, interesting article. I'm not going to go through the whole thing. It was published in the Bell System Technical Journal in July of 38. He is prophesying the need for some way to carry these television signals, these wide bandwidth signals from point A to point B to point C and all over. And it looks like coaxial cable might be the ticket. Now, at this point in time in 1938, Bell had not deployed coax. That was not going to happen until 1941. They put a coaxial run in of a few hundred miles across Wisconsin. It was used to carry 600 telephone calls simultaneously. That was what they call their L1 coaxial carrier technology or cable. Here's the dope on the cable. First deployed, as I said, in 1941. The technology was such, it was good for 2.7 megahertz, not really as wide as we'd like for television, but it would work for television, certainly 343 line television, not too terrible for 441. And it would pass 525 line video, just didn't have all the high frequencies there. And this is interesting because I found in places L1 existed as 4 tubes per cable or 6 tubes. I found a picture showing 6 tubes. There are other conductors in here, twisted pair conductors. These were order wires, telemetry wires to monitor these repeaters, let them make adjustments remotely. So it was a pretty full trunk here. And you needed to hang a repeater on this cable every 8 miles. So yeah, very costly to deploy this, but it looked like the way to go for these cross-country multiple telephone circuits and just quite possibly the key to getting video to these stations. This is an interesting map I found. It was dated 1947. It is really sort of pie in the sky. Bell, if you read the fine print down here in the key, it's telling you this is not what's there right now, AT&T long line wise for television connectivity. It's what is planned, what might be there if we're lucky by 1950. So what I want to show here, okay, I want to move that out of the way. Thank you. Okay. Okay. What I want to show here is really what existed when this thing was published in 1947. And I don't have my, oh, there we go, wrong way. Okay, this is all they really had. They had a New York and Philadelphia. It's about a little less than 100 miles of coax. They had put that in the 30s doing some experimentation. And then they extended it to Baltimore. Baltimore got its first television in 47, and it was further extended down to Washington. That was all that was there in 1947. So what you saw in that other map was really pie in the sky. Let's keep our fingers crossed. Let's hope, let's keep our shoulder to the wheel. You did see headlines once in a while. This is from January the 5th, 1947, not long after the 48, not long after the end of 47. AT&T had committed 76 million, put cable in the ground south all the way to Charlotte, extended on down from DC, and all the way from New York west out to Chicago, then down to St. Louis. Somebody have a comment? I thought I heard somebody talking. I'm sorry. This is almost $1 billion in today's money. So they were expecting a return on this. This is a picture I found was rather interesting, showing that it was actually a plow train, which I'll show in a minute, the full thing, for opening the ground up and burying this rather large diameter cable, which, as I said, had to have a repeater every 8 miles. And I don't think they could get 8 miles on one cable, so I'm sure they had to do splicing along the way. Here's the full train. There's a Caterpillar tractor with the treads pulling this thing. There's the plow opening the ground up. There's what they call control equipment for the plow, which is putting the cable down in the trench. This device is reeling out the cable and filling in the trench as they go. Now, you wonder, I never found a spec for this. You wonder how many miles a day they could lay cable, how many miles of cable they could lay per day. I'm sure a lot of it depended on the weather. If the ground was too muddy, that's a no-go. If you had rocky soil, probably going to slow them down, hilly soil, any number of things. So I really don't know what the sort of progress they got out of there, but I know it had to be incredibly slow. But Bell liked to do things hardwire. I think they had sort of a disdain for radio once they got shut out of it back by the monopolistic rulings there in the courts in the 20s that put them out of the broadcasting business, left them in the manufacturing arm and also the transmission arm for the radio stations that were developing. About the only thing Bell had going RF-wise at this point in time was high frequency or shortwave radio connectivity to Europe. Matter of fact, they had to maintain this HF radio service, diversity shortwave service to Europe. That's how you placed a transatlantic call up until 1956. That was the first time they had a transatlantic cable that could handle telephony. So yeah, that was the only radio they had. So maybe Bell was a little bit gun shy about trying to experiment with this thing called microwave. GE, some others were not. Actually, Western Union had prevailed upon RCA to install a microwave link between New York and Philadelphia. General Electric, they were tired of this fading, this loss of programming from New York with this over-the-air link they had. They said, we're not going to wait on AT&T long lines to get coax from New York to Schenectady. We're going to do it ourselves. And they put in a multi-link intercity microwave system from New York to Schenectady. It only went one way. But the good thing, it terminated at the brand new AT&T Video Switching Center in New York. And there were feeds there from all the stations, all of the TV stations, including Dumont. So they had a choice of calling AT&T long lines in New York. They could take feeds from CBS, NBC, Dumont, or ABC, which was really a fledgling operation at that time. So they were not afraid to try microwave. Also, here's another instance of somebody jumping the gun, not waiting for the coax to be installed by AT&T. This was a private microwave link. WBKB, Balaban Cats in Chicago, wanted to pick up in the 1947 football season some games out of South Bend, Notre Dame. So they contracted with the General Electric to put in a microwave system, a 3-hop system here. So it worked very well. So I guess this maybe gave AT&T long lines a little bit more confidence in the ability of microwave to be reliable to work to carry this new thing called video. So they bankrolled a project going between New York City and Boston. This was circa 1947-48. It was called an experimental video link. It 1, 2, 3, 8 hops to get between the two cities. Having worked in New Haven, which had television on the air in 1948, I find this routing sort of interesting. It seemed like it would have been much easier to go up the coast and go up to Boston, but they went sort of round about. So when New Haven finally got connected, they were picking signals up off the air out of New York City too, early on. But when they finally got connected, it was by coaxial cable that had been stretched between New York and New Haven. So AT&T, again, call this experimental, but it did work and worked rather well and gave them the confidence they needed to go ahead and start building out this system, get on the ball, make it move fast. We're going to build the brunt of the system with microwave radio rather than, and I lost my control here. What's going, okay. Than by the conventional wired system with coaxial cable being buried. This is one of these repeater stations in the linkage between New York and New Haven. You can tell it looks like more than experimental. It looks pretty permanent, but it did work and it worked quite well. This, by the way, picture I wanted to show, this is the brand new 1946 AT&T Long Lines Video Switching Center in New York. You'll see a picture of this somewhat later in its evolution. This is a connectivity map, another one of these pie in the sky things that AT&T was fond of publishing. This came out in mid-48. They did by that time have connectivity into Chicago on up to Madison. They were actually going down, hitting St. Louis. They'd not gotten to Memphis, long way away from getting to the coast. I think they were down to Richmond, Virginia. That was about as far south as it went, other than St. Louis. So it's still a work in progress. Interesting, I found an article in Billboard magazine talking about the stations divvying up this one circuit, which was made available going to Chicago. This was microwave. It was backed up later by coax, but there was only one path. So you had 5 potential users for this in New York vying for time. They flipped coins, drew straws, whatever. Interestingly, NBC, or maybe not interestingly, NBC came out with a lion's share, almost 9 hours a week. Dumont beat CBS out. They got used it for 7, CBS 5.5. ABC more time than CBS. And what I found very interesting, WPIX, this independent station, which had gone on in the big city, was able to get 2.5 hours per week. I don't know what the logic in this, whether this was going to try to be a network. PIX was going to build a network. I know that WGN Tribune owned WGN in Chicago, which had television on the air. Then they also owned PIX. So maybe they were going to try to do some sort of a very early CNN news format, but they dropped out fairly early because 2.5 hours a week just was not worth it. We get on to some more solid connectivity. You see where things are in 1949. Things are looking better, but we're still stopped at Richmond. They're building to Norfolk, and they're building down to Greensboro and on to Charlotte, but really hasn't gone too much further west. Another player here. Let's see. Let's try to make some money out of this television thing. War is over. Westinghouse had a lot of wartime contracts. It did most of the electronics and other companies. Glenn Martin Aviation, they got together. Let's see what we can do to move television signals around. So they figured out they could put a 1 kilowatt VHF transmitter in a surplus B-29 bomber retrofitted, sit there and fly a holding pattern at 30,000 feet. And you had a potential coverage of over 400 miles down below. And they went a step further. If you had 14 planes in holding patterns in the right part of the right spots in the country, you could cover the whole country, do coast to coast television and put video in about 78% of the country. And they also proposed to carry FM radio the same way. I lost my control again. I don't know what's going on. There we go. Yeah, this is one of the B-29s. This was conceived in 1945. They flew their first mission, so to speak, in 1946. They did discover some problems along the way. It was grounded for a while. It flew again. It was successful. It did what it was supposed to do, but there were problems. There were weather problems. You can't always fly in bad weather, keep a plane on station. You've got fuel problems. You've got crew problems. You got electronic equipment reliability. And because they operated on regular television channels, there's a great potential for co-channel interference with the terrestrial broadcasters. But this is the idealized view of what was going to do the Stratovision. Here, all 14 planes orbiting their holding patterns, and they're going coast to coast and covering most of the big cities. Leadville, Colorado, I don't know that was a major market. I'm not even sure where Curtis is up here. But anyway, that's what they're showing. It flew in the 40s. It flew in the 50s. I think even in the early 60s, they were still playing with this. I got involved in a project involving an airborne broadcasting platform, believe it or not, in as late as the early 1990s. This was something the government wanted to do, AM, FM, and TV. And that's probably the topic for another one of these discussions. I won't go into that now. This is one of the microwave towers when AT&T long lines finally was convinced microwave is here to stay. They built a number of these. Actually, it was 176 relay stations to go from coast to coast. This one, I think it's still there. I took this picture maybe 7, 8 years ago. It is slightly west of Springfield, Ohio. They're just off I-70, just south of I-70. Not too far, as I say, from Springfield. There are a few other of these relics around. Now, they weren't all these concrete lighthouse-looking stations in this coast-to-coast linkage. Some of them were much simpler. Here's one up on a mountain. It depended on where they had to put them. This is some sort of a snow caterpillar to get people up there. But you consider even a lot easier than running coax coast to coast, burying it. You still had problems. You had to site these things. You had to do your survey work to make sure you had the kind of reliable path you needed, the elevation you needed for Fresnel zone clearance. You had to have power. You had to have accessibility. You had to be able to get all this gear up there and build these things. So it was not an easy undertaking, but by goodness, they made it work. 1869, Promontory Point, Utah. You all know about this. The Golden Spike was driven into tracks, linking the country east to west. Well, the same thing happened, about 80 years later. This was President Truman speaking in San Francisco in 1951, September. He was appearing at the peace conference there with Japan. We were signing some formal treaties. I don't know why this thing is sticking on me, but it does. It was considered to be then the largest television audience in history. It drew some 30 million viewers. 94 of the 100 stations on the air then carried the broadcast. It was available in every television market in the country, and it involved this tremendous expenditure of time, money, and effort in building these 107 microwave relay stations to get from San Francisco, the Opera House there, where the ceremonies took place, back to New York to distribute this thing coast to coast. You look at what it cost, just a tremendous amount of money they committed, but they knew this was going to pay for itself, probably in short order, the way television was taking off. I would like to mention this was scheduled to open on September 28th. AT&T Long Lines had scheduled and committed quite a bit of money for a very big gala. A lot of celebrities, a lot of whoop-de-doo there. But the State Department, because this conference occurred early in the month, they twisted some arms, called in some favors at AT&T, and got them to open it up on September the 4th rather than September the 28th. So yeah, that's when the Golden Spike was driven for television. Here's an article about it. Millions see coast to coast. There's Harry Truman again in front of the camera. CBS in New York took out ads in several of the dailies there, full page ads, making sure the public knew about this, telling them to tune in 10:30 tonight Eastern time to see the broadcast. There's going to be another one at 1 o'clock Eastern on Channel 2 there in New York. Big television's first really big program. By the way, this is what the television routing looked like at the end of 51. They had extended from San Francisco down to Los Angeles, had gone down into the deep South, picked up Jacksonville, some other cities. So this is what things looked like in 1951. I'm going to skip through a little bit. I do want to show this picture. This is the first hop there off the Opera House. This is temporary, of course, in San Francisco. If you look over here very carefully, this is a very fuzzy picture. You can see the horn antennas on the first permanent part of this radio link, which involved these 107 stations to get it across the country. This is interesting, at least to me. This is where the system had evolved by 1962, a little over 10 years after that 1951 first coast-to-coast linkage. I think everybody except maybe North Dakota, Idaho, Montana was able to get television service. What I find really interesting down here, they actually had a microwave link into Cuba from the Florida Keys. I don't know what the purpose of that was. I don't know how many Cubans were interested in English language television. It may have been to carry sports or bring in some news actualities. And you notice here too, you have to look very carefully. Some of these lines are not quite as wide as the others back here in the East. That's coax versus microwave, or more modern, not the L1, the original coax, but the L3, which could pass 8 megahertz. They note these routes equipped for monochrome only. Yeah, as I mentioned, the original L1 coax they put in only passed about 2.7, 2.8 megahertz. So that's where you were. Remarkable system, remarkable bit of work in making this thing work for as long as it did, as well as it did. This is what the switching center looked like by the late 60s, early 70s in New York. A couple of Conrack monitors, color monitors there. They equipped for color, tall telephone company racks, everybody wearing their crisp white shirt and necktie. And I want to comment here, the television station I worked for in New Haven for 5 years, we had service, of course, for our ABC feed from New York. We had 3PLs, or dedicated private line telephones there at the master control switcher. You picked up one phone, there was no dial, the other one rang. You picked up that phone, the one in the control room rang. We had one to the transmitter. We had one to this place in New York, a direct line, a PL, and we had one to the AT&T audio switching center in West Haven. If I had trouble, I was on duty, I noticed something wrong with the video, I picked up my phone, usually within 1 or 2 rings, one of these people or one of their peers picked up the phone, went over the problem with me, isolated it pretty quick. The same thing, if I needed to get a feed, bring in a special sports feed or something, I picked up on the phone saying, hey, I need a switch at a certain time. And we would sit there and talk until the switch was made. Absolutely beautiful service. I do not recall a single time that we lost any video at all from ABC or anything else we did with our circuit there from New York. It was just a beautiful time in television. This does not exist anymore. There are no operators to help you folks. You know that, and I know that. But every good thing has to come to an end. The downfall started, the dominoes started toppling in the early 70s with the launch of some satellites. Anik 1, the Canadians put up. Hughes built a satellite. It was the first terrestrial geosync satellite for communications. It had 12 full bandwidth transponders that could carry color video. They used it to relay CBC and some other Canadian video services networks across Canada. We got the same idea. 1978, PBS began to offer programming to its member stations via satellite instead of AT&T long lines. NBC, by 1984, they had put in place what they call Skylink. I think they were sort of seeing the handwriting on the wall with the beginning of the breakup of the Bell system and knew it probably wouldn't be long. So NBC became the first commercial network to move to satellite distribution. They opted to go with KU when they proved it was reliable. And of course, in the 1970s, 1980s, concurrent with this, fiber is coming to its own. A lot of fiber is being put down across the country. If you remember in 1985, Sprint advertised themselves as having the first fully fiber optic telecommunications network in the country. So again, the dominoes were falling pretty fast by the end of the 80s. And in 1988, very quietly, AT&T filed an application with the FCC to discontinue terrestrial connectivity services, citing sharply diminished demand. So rest in peace, AT&T Broadcast Services. You did a damn good job when you were doing it. And as we used to say when we'd finish a feed, that's a good night, New York. You can drop the Vanda. If you haven't worked with this, Vanda is just short for video and audio. Well, my time is up. I thank you for yours.
Jim?
Yes.
James?
Yes.
Regarding the interconnect to Cuba, you remember Don Saltzman?
I do remember the name.
Yeah. Well, Don was working for NBC back in the 50s. They did a remote out of Havana for the Today Show. And AT&T long maintained a troposcatter link between Florida and Cuba.
Well, that's probably what that would be. I don't think it was microwave, that sort of a distance. That's
No,
really
it wasn't
pushing it. I
microwave.
mean, I do know of 165 mile microwave link, which was fairly successful. But going over the Keys at 70 miles, that is really a haul for microwave. Yes, you make a good point.
Yeah, they did make it work, and there's assorted videos on YouTube showing interconnects from the Havana station, specifically CMQ TV, channel 6, with the NBC network, because CMQ radio and television was owned and operated by the same outfit that was the main RCA distributor in Cuba.
Okay, yeah, I know RCA did sell the early Cuban the broadcasters when they went to television. They did sell most of the equipment down there. So yeah, RCA was very heavy interest in Cuba at that time. Yeah. So any questions? I know I went through pretty fast on this. I wanted to talk about some other things, but I didn't get to them. One of the things I would like to bring up, I didn't bring up, you saw that connectivity between New York and Chicago, how the networks drew straws, cut cards, whatever, to find out how much time they could have. One of the things I found there, the way the video service was tariffed, and I just find this unbelievable, it probably had something to do with the downfall of the Dumont network and the Dumont empire, above and beyond Alan B. Dumont's getting in bed with Paramount, thinking that this was going to be a good business partner. But one of the things I found, when they built Dumont Television Network for service into Chicago, into Pittsburgh, they also billed him for radio service, because they had tariffed this into the rate for the other networks, CBS, NBC, ABC, which did have radio service. Of course, Dumont never got into radio broadcasting, but he had to pay the freight just like the other three, as if he did have, was using the feed for network radio broadcasting. So a lot of extra money expended with no return there for poor Mr. Dumont. So just an interesting little tidbit. You find these things down in the footnotes of history if you dig deeply enough.
James?
Yes.
You had mentioned in the early part, previous to coax cable, about the low bandwidth. I have a picture, if I could share it, from the, you had mentioned maybe they tried to send mechanical television, but they didn't do that, but they did send photos quite often, like a wire service. And I don't know.
Actually, they did. They did do television, I believe, between Washington and Whippany and on into New York. I know that was a radio link into New York, but I believe they were using a telephone pair to bring mechanical video down to Washington.
Right. Is this picture coming in?
I see the picture. Yes.
Yeah, that was in 1924. It was this actual picture was a press release photo that was sent to the Gernsback publications that I ended up with in my collection, and it's labeled as the first pictures transmitted by wire, and it was let's see how it was 15 photographs from Cleveland to New York, and it took 2 hours to come across.
Mm-hmm.
So not exactly fast enough for video, but they're very proud of the quality, and they mentioned in there that you could even see in the veil that Mrs. Coolidge is wearing, that you can see the little markings in the veil.
Right.
So anyway, I'll turn the screen share off now.
Okay. Well, thanks for sharing that. And I thought somebody might catch a little something here. Very much talked about was the first coast-to-coast color cast, which occurred New Year's Day, 1954, Tournament of Roses Parade, with the pickup, of course, in Pasadena. And the cable, AT&T did not start deploying the L3 cable, which was good up to 8 megahertz. Of course, it needed repeaters every 4 miles now. That did not start rolling out until 1954. So how did they get the color information, the subcarrier running at 3.58 megahertz on this cable, which was only good to 2.7 megahertz? I thought somebody would raise their hand about that, maybe. No? George, you with us? Can you talk? Yeah, George Lemaster there. George, I remembered reading something about this. George was kind enough to do some research earlier today and sort of corroborated my memory on this. He found a couple of papers addressing how this was taken care of, how they were able to pass NTSC color with the 358 subcarrier over this bandwidth, 2.7, 2.8 megahertz bandwidth limited coax. George, you want to talk, or you want me to pick it up?
I can, if I can be heard, I'll try.
Yeah, I can hear you, sure.
Okay, so there were in the 1954 proceeding of the IRE, that's January 54, they described it. It was also in our RCA review. RCA and NBC came up with a system where they rolled off the monochrome response at 2 megahertz and then shifted the 358 down to a band between about 2 and 2.7 megahertz to fit into that band. So it's the old heterodyne color trick done on a fixed circuit. John Turner probably knows about that circuit too. And I guess it worked. And that's what they did. It was called heterodyne color.
That's fascinating because I read the paper about the technique, but I never knew that that's what they used for the Rosebrain network.
Oh, I don't know if we know that for sure, do we, James? That was just a method that they had in 54 available. And by 54, weren't they running mostly microwave links across the country anyway?
Well, they still had a lot, the East Coast, they still had backbone coax. I know the coax, again, we had a coax connection in Connecticut. I think that went in about 1949, 1950, which was prior to the deployment of this L3 technology, which did pass 358 color. So I'm assuming because it was channel 6 then, WN8C, they did carry that 1954 New Year's Day color cast. I talked with some of the people who were there. They put to 5 of the Model 5 sets in the Armory. They had one there at the station for monitoring. And the others was a big deal. And I'm assuming that's how they handled it because they did not have microwave connectivity. At that time, it was strictly coax.
Well, Mr. John Turner, would you be able to help us out on history on that?
Well, the L system was in place until the 1990s, and it was still active. I remember going out to Chicago and shutting down the L5 system they had out there when they're able to get all the video off of it and onto the microwave system. But that was the last L carrier system, last basically wireline video they had was L5. And Western Electric built a whole bunch of nifty equalizers to use on that system, which are just works of art if you can ever get your hands on one. These are called A1s and A2s. They actually got up to A4 vintage equalizers, but these things, a single channel of video would take up a half a rack of space, and you could run about 2.5 miles of balanced 124 ohm cable over those things. Were pretty nifty stuff. But there's none of that microwave is left. Nancy shut down the last one in New York around, I think, 1990, which was called the number 5 radio at 32A of A. And the building got sold to a real estate developer who promptly started rebuilding the place and sheetrocked the New York telephone guys in one day, which was quite an interesting day to spend over there.
So, would you reckon, John, that when they did the coast-to-coast color broadcast in 54, it was maybe a mix of microwave and the color under and some straight equalized cables and all sorts of things, or what do you think was all involved?
Yeah, I mean, that was when they had the microwave in place. The bandwidth of that stuff was good to, out beyond 10 megahertz. It was quite nice. It was all FM. They actually closed loop the microwave, so they had a return channel, and they actually modified the output power of the klystrons depending on the path loss on each of those links. They did some clever stuff. I think this was done in the 1950s or in the 40s, actually. But I'm sure that that coast to coast thing that NBC did was, like you said, George, a combination of wireline and microwave.
And a point I didn't make, I should have made, when AT&T started hauling this video and audio, the audio and video almost never went with the same routing. And I find this so remarkable because microwave, even coax, the video is going pretty damn near the speed of light. But when you run the audio through the telephone pair with the loading, it is very slow. But AT&T did a heck of a job of keeping the video and audio married. I don't ever recall seeing any lip flap, of course, which is something we see every night on the news and everything else nowadays. But yeah, they just did a remarkable job keeping the video, audio separate, different routings entirely. Sometimes they would change the routings depending on the circuit requirements for loading. And it was just superlative synchronization between audio and video. And something else I didn't mention too, this network, once it was in place there in the 60s, they could break it. They could move things around. I know Friday afternoons during the college football season, they used to run a closed circuit feed to the ABC affiliates. And they would describe how they were going to cover college football the next day. And they would break the network isolated in maybe 5 or 6 groups, depending on parts of the country, so they could run one commercial that would appeal to one group. A different sponsor would buy a different commercial to reach another region of the country. And these were fed out by some of the ABC affiliate stations in these broken off networks. And then, of course, as soon as the game was over, the network was all back together. It was just remarkable how well this thing worked.
I mean, the nifty part of it, too, was when they realized they had all that bandwidth, James, they were able to come up with a plan to put the audio on top of the video. And the Bell Laboratories and Homedale developed these pretty sharp filters. So they actually had a system where they had 4 subcarriers that they could put on top of the video without interference. And they got Faranon Microwave to build the equipment for them. And then Faranon got bought by Harris. So there's a combination of stuff that was installed in the various central offices that either said Bell Labs on it, had the Bell symbol on it, or Faranon or Harris. And it was I think it was 5.2, 5.8, 6.4, and 7.5 were the frequencies that those things used. And which is interesting because when they got into the satellite business, what do you think they did to get the audio on there? They used the same exact multiplexers.
And, we wound up very common 6.2, 6.8 megahertz audio with satellite when we were doing analog satellite. Yeah.
James, one thing I'm curious about, especially given that we're coming up on the coronation of King Charles, is ABC beat the other U.S. networks to the punch on carrying the kinescopes from the BBC of Queen Elizabeth's coronation by getting a feed out of the CBC from Toronto to Buffalo. Do you have any information on how AT&T linked with, I guess, CN, Canadian National, north of the border?
All I know is what I talked about when I talked about kinescopes. That was Dick O'Brien's project with CBS to Kenny as much as they could during the day. They processed the film as soon as it came out of the Kenny camera and loaded it aboard a special plane they chartered, taking out most of the seats. And I was told by Dick O'Brien, they landed at Boston. That was the most eastern point where the CBS network could be fed. That's how CBS got this on the air. I can't address any of the other network feeds from that 1953 coronation. No. So maybe somebody does have some more information I don't have.
From what I read from the CBC history is an RAF Canberra bomber took the kinescope films to Corner Brook, Newfoundland, and an RCAF jet took them from Newfoundland to Montreal, and they went over the 3 stations. Yeah, there were only 3 stations of the CBC network in that year. And ABC took the feed out of CBC in across the border from Toronto to Buffalo. I always wondered how they did that.
I might say a couple of words about the PBS network, if it's okay.
You have my blessing, George, anytime.
I don't know if Ed Williams is on the group here. I thought he was. Ed Williams worked at PBS. I worked at PBS, and I started in '79, right after they had gone over to satellite. I believe the story on that was PBS had developed their own 4-channel digital audio system that went on something like 5.5 megahertz subcarrier, and AT&T would not allow them to put that over the terrestrial microwave link in competition with their audio system. So, and this was probably about the same time that AT&T was doing the FM thing over the upper bandwidth of the link for stereo to the broadcast. I remember the day at NBC they brought the FM stereo online on the AT&T link. I could hear them rustling papers on the desk up at NBC Today Show. That was the big advantage of the 15 kilohertz audio. But in any event, the PBS went to CPB and got the money to put in an entire nationwide satellite system to feed like 350 downlinks approximately. And I understood the cost of that network was about the same as to pay itself out at 10 years at AT&T rates. So it was a good deal, and that included the satellite transponders. They used 4. And so with their own satellite channel, PBS could put whatever audio they wanted to, along with the video on the transponders. So that was another milestone in the broadcasting. They were the first US network to go nationwide satellite delivery, and it worked out quite well. And if Ed Williams is on the conference, I'd appreciate him to chime in.
Yes, I am here. Thank you very much, George. And James, what a fascinating presentation. Your knowledge of broadcast history is just astounding. But yes, I was involved in the PBS satellite system. We put in 150 downlinks that were 30 feet in diameter, Andrew antennas, 10-meter antennas, and it was the 2 gigahertz band. It was quite an amazing operation. And it was and yes, we had the stereo audio in there as well. One of the things that we went to satellite for was because we kept getting bumped off of the AT&T networks whenever there was an outage somewhere along the line. And ABC, CBS, and NBC all had rights over us. And so if you had 3 circuits or 4 circuits out there with PBS on it, and one of them went down, especially if ours went down, one of the others took over that, and we'd lose coverage or accidentally start substituting a network, commercial networks programming for a while at some of the affiliates. So that was a strange thing. But the quality and the capacity and the ability to do reconfigurations was really quite amazing with that satellite network that PBS put in.
I remember seeing the big downlink dish here in San Francisco for KQED.
Hang on a minute.
Yep. Is that the uplink?
That was the that was a demonstration downlink, but they all look very much the same. Andrew produced these, and I was involved in some of the installations, most unusual installations, and some of them went on rooftops. Others were located 1 or 2 microwave hops away from the station because of the problem of interference from other common carrier operations. I said 2 gigahertz earlier, I meant 4. And we had to be very careful about AT&T's use of those channels as well. So we had to protect them, especially from our uplinks, but also we had to be protected from their transmissions as well. So it was a a real interesting frequency coordination operation that took place. And many of those satellite terminals were located maybe at a station's transmitter site, or even a third location, which was 1 or 2 microwave hops away.
And there's something else that George and I were talking about earlier today, and that was the energy dispersal or dithering signal that was part of the satellite system, because there was a fear early on that this RF being downlinked, C-band RF being downlinked from the satellite, 3.7 to 4.2 gigahertz, might interfere with the terrestrial paths. And so there was, as you recall, this energy dispersal or this dithering they did to slew things around, so it didn't stay exactly in the same frequency. Of course, that turned out to be a non-problem, but it was something that had to be considered and was part of the makeup of the satellite signals for quite a while. Maybe still is, I don't know. I know I got involved in a Russian satellite. I mean, they had the great granddaddy of all dispersals. I mean, this thing was so wide, it was banging the IF filters. Just an incredible amount of dispersal that they were using with on one of their satellite networks.
I don't recall specifically about that, but the Western Union operated the uplink and the well, some of the uplinks, but mainly the satellites controlled them that we used.
Ed, did PBS do any experimental satellite links before they put that link in with the Westar, or did they just kind of start cutting over once they got their uplink facility built?
No, there were a number of experiments that took place. That's why it was we decided to go with Westar. I think there was one other operator as well at the time, and I don't recall who that was. But I visited the Upper Saddle River facility that they had there. And just like the early AT&T long lines and their microwave networks, this was heavy duty construction, well overbuilt, built in a valley to shield it from all kinds of interference. Amazing facility that they had put together for this, because they were doing not only national but international facilities, and they had several satellites up there. And it was a very big deal to launch a satellite in those days. 23,000 miles, and then keep it station keeping process was complicated as well. And you had to be very careful because you couldn't refuel the satellites once they were in orbit, but they had to be kept in the same position so that the receivers, as well as the transmitter, weren't out of the beam, if you will, so that the receiving antennas didn't have to be readjusted. That was a very complicated process. And as a result, the satellite, in effect, operated in a figure 8 formation there in orbit, because that seemed to be the best combination of taking advantage of the wobble of the Earth and the amount of fuel that was aboard the individual satellites.
I might share a quick story. There, one of the satellite engineer at PBS, Jack, I forget his name. You would maybe recall, Ed, he was a programmable calculator fanatic, and he always had several running in his office at one time. But he wanted to see when Western Union would move the satellite from one corner of that sector box up to the other corner. He wanted to plot what they were doing. And it turned at PBS, we had a vector scope on the outgoing channels and another vector scope on the return channel, so you could see if there was any distortion in the signal. So for one half, since that vector scope at PBS Tech Controller control room was locked to local subcarrier, for half a day, it would rotate slowly clockwise as the satellite's being pulled toward the sun, and then it would stop. And the other half, 12 hours, it would go the other direction as the Earth's gravitational pull would pull the satellite towards the Earth. So Jack got the idea of calculating what they were doing. So one night, in the middle of the night, Western Union's going to use the gas and propel the satellite from its one corner of that box out to the other position in space, where it can start that figure 8 walk over a period of months, I think, and go down. So he came in the middle of the night and used his calculators plotting the speed of rotation of the vector scope to monitor the subcarrier Doppler in the control room to calculate the movement that they were making of the satellite and how fast they were moving it and decelerating it and stop at the right point in the box. I thought it was a lot of fun that he did that. I don't remember his name, but one time they, Puerto Rico, I think, had a tracker on their satellite receive dish, and they lost the satellite. So he had to go down and find, get it repositioned for them. And I said, well, Jack, are you going to take a spectrum analyzer? No, I don't need that. I just took my pocket calculator, and I'm going to calculate a certain time of the day when the shadow of the horn exactly is at the center of the dish, and move it there, and we'll be done. And he did that. It probably took him 15 minutes to reposition their dish. And then he went sightseeing in Puerto Rico.
There were installations, two installations in Alaska, one of which had to be mounted on permafrost. It was a 15-meter antenna and used one of those extremely low temperature parametric amplifiers in order to receive the signal. And it was aimed at about 3 or 4 degrees above the horizon in order to see the satellite, which was over the equator. And we put up a couple of those up into Alaska. Quite an amazing feat.
Overall, you guys did a fantastic job putting that system in, and it served well for a long time.
John Ball was the chief engineer, director of engineering there. He came from ComSat, so he had a background there that he obviously applied to that, plus the rigors of doing all of the technical details on it. And he made sure it all got done right. That's pretty.
His office was right across the hall from me, and I remember he would definitely do some directing over there to the contractors, and he was quite a remarkable engineer. They had some great folks working on that project, and it went well.
James, this is Steve. Fascinating presentation. You really do a good job of pulling all the facts together in an interesting way. Brought back memories of we put our first satellite, it was in the cable business, first satellite dish in I think 76 when HBO went on the satellite, and all the stuff we went through worrying about terrestrial interference and going around with a spectrum analyzer and reading the signal levels of all the various, companies were using the same frequency range. And it, as you said, it turned out to be nothing. It was no big deal at all. But boy, we spent a lot of energy on.
Well, it was a problem in some places. Believe me, I know my operation downtown Washington wanted a satellite downlink in the worst way. And you got up on the roof of this 10-story office building downtown DC where we were. I swear to God, you could have held up a hot dog on a stick and cooked it. There was so much terrestrial microwave energy there. It just blanked out everything. And I know I was given the assignment. We had to have real-time Russian television delivered to DC. That's probably the subject of a whole other presentation. It really took me on a very interesting part of my career path. But we had to have this. We had to make our director honest. He had admitted to the press, or declared to the press, that we would be watching Russian television. Of course, this was during the Cold War, in real time to look for evidence, and I'm quoting here, of dissemination of disinformation. He was quoted, and I have the U.S. News and World Report where he was quoted. So I was the only guy that had any hands-on satellite. They came to me, can you make this happen? And we elected, the only feasible way to do this was with the Russian Molyas, which is a constellation of 4 satellites, each usable for about 6 hours. They're in a very highly inclined elliptical orbit. They have to be tracked the whole 6 hours. Then you switch off. They hand it over. You moved your dish. You started the track again. And the way we got away with this thing, the signal the Russians were using, of course, the low end of the terrestrial microwave band was 3.7 gigahertz. And the Molniya frequency slopped down below that and right up above it. So with a lot of filtering, building a shielding cage with an knife edge diffraction skirt around the top, we were able to track Molyas from the roof of the building there with this 4.5 meter SA dish on a special X over Y mount. But I know and everybody was very, very concerned, is it going to work because of this incredibly high level of terrestrial interference from Ma Bell there on the building. But we did make it work with the filtering and the cage around it. But it was, and we were lucky too, because the dish was almost bird bath to do most of the tracking. The angle of the satellite was so high. So yeah, but I was sweating bullets. This thing is going to work or not going to work. We gotta make our director honest. But yeah, the terrestrial interference was a big issue. Just a lot of places you just could not put a C-band downlink because of the terrestrial microwave. But again, the problem was with this dispersal signal, the concern was that the satellites radiating their energy down in the same band would interfere with the existing AT&T long lines or microwave infrastructure. But that was never a problem. That the satellite energy by the time it got to the ground, 22,300 miles, and the spreading loss that was involved, what you're looking at 190, 195 dB down. So yeah, it was a non-starter.
James, you mentioned earlier aircraft distribution of TV signals. Perhaps you recall the MPATI program, Airborne Instruction Television, that was based in Indianapolis. I don't recall what the aircraft was, but they broadcast, I think it was on channels 72 to 76 in those days when it went that high. And we were able to receive it in Athens, Ohio, where I was at Ohio University. Not very well. It was probably the signal noise ratio was 30 dB, maybe 35 if that, and using a 64 element antenna up on the rooftop of the radio TV building. But we were able to use it to some extent. We were on the edge of the beam on that. But as noted also earlier, it flew in a figure 8 pattern, and even though the antenna was straight down from the bottom of the aircraft, it still wobbled a lot, and as a result, the transmission problems at our end were not all that good. The reception that was not all that good, not consistent anyway.
Certainly, as I mentioned, it did persist into the 50s and on into the 60s. I didn't mention MPATI by name, but I'm certainly aware of that. Yeah, but it was not a perfect way to get television from here to there, but it did work, at least on paper and to some degree in practice.
You mentioned all the RF interference in DC. I seem to recall one HD transmission demo where we set up an antenna on the roof of the venue, and we had all kinds of reception problems until we moved it so it was out of sight of the White House.
Right. Well, that was one of the considerations. George and I were talking about this again earlier today. I recall a presentation at one of our SMPTE meetings by someone from PBS. I think it was Ed Dalton. Maybe you remember him also, Ed. But it was a presentation there at SMPTE, and they said that they chose this site, Bryn Mawr, down here near the Beltway at Springfield, Virginia. It's an area called Bryn Mawr, because there's a natural trench east to west which offers shielding, because most of the interference is coming in, again, north-south rather than east-west in this part of the country. So that's why that site was chosen for the what they call the MOT, the main origination terminal. And it's still there to this day. And there's another big satellite operation which has moved in next door and still operates out of there, even though the requirement for satellite has diminished considerably with all of the fiber and other connectivity we have. But there's still a satellite activity there in Bryn Mawr. which is not that far from where I'm speaking right now. Probably well, not even 7 miles, probably 5 miles as crow flies from where I'm sitting right now.
Right next to the mixing bowl there of the interstate highways.
Yeah.
Yes, that's exactly right. Why that location was found, because they were looking at a lot of different locations, and they discovered that one, and it was available. There were some warehouses already there, but we built in there, and it, like you said, it's working to this day. We had both uplink and downlink capability. We could look in multiple different directions. It was an amazing installation. I think George was there as well.
Yeah, we did a lot of business with the PBS neighbor, the MOT neighbor there, WIT, Washington International Teleport, it was called back then. They had a very, very good assortment of dishes of various sizes and capabilities.
Yeah, I'd forgotten about the Washington International Teleport. Good memory there, James.
Yeah, that's how we got C-band, because there's no way we could do C-band downtown downlink. So they would downlink something for us, and we had a 2-hop microwave link to get it back to our building downtown DC.
Yeah, talking about that heterodyne system to squeeze color onto the narrowband coax reminded me of the RCA capacitive disc video disc system, where they moved the colored subcarrier down lower in the video band. And of course, by that time, they had comb filters, so they could comb out the dot pattern, which would have been really obnoxious. But the other point about doing that is that they used pre-combing of the signal before it was recorded on the disc. Because if you think about the use of comb filters in NTSC sets, if you just put in a comb filter, it works fine until the camera pans across Johnny Carson's plaid suit. And so you have to have all kinds of motion detection of circuits in the receiver to try to figure out when there's motion that's really not color subcarrier and turn off the homing. But in the case where you control both the source and the decoder, and you can comb, pre-comb, and then comb in the decoder. And so there's never any mixing, even when the camera is panning.
Yeah, the home video tape machines also use color under process.
Right, because you had nowhere near the writing speed you needed to record color directly with a Betamax or a VHS machine. So that was the only way you got color. You heterodyned it down, the color under down below 1 megahertz, and then heterodyned it back up for playback. Of course, no big deal. I guess it was thought to be a big deal at one point in time. You completely, when you do that, you lose your subcarrier to horizontal sync relationship.
Yeah, the other thing is videotape, video cassette systems rolled off the luminance and of course the chrominance before recording the luminance. So they did not use a comb. They just used brute force filtering and reduced the resolution.
Smart cookies back then, I'll tell you that.
James, you mentioned transmission to Cuba earlier on. Do you recall the TV Marty experiments?
Oh, yeah, I was involved at the very beginning of that. Unfortunately, I was able to to diplomatically remove myself and get into something else. But I was called in early on when there was an interest in doing TV Marti. Of course, they'd been doing Radio Marti for some time, but then they wanted to do television, and I knew where that was going to go.
Weren't they using a tethered balloon?
No, balloon. No, you called it an aerostat. You never referred to it as a balloon, but it did have this big Kevlar cable. And now I can talk about this. There was a cartoon. Remember the back page of Broadcasting Magazine? They always had a good little cartoon. And this one in particular, there's a guy who's a tourist with his Hawaiian shirt, and he's down. There's a sign on the building that says TV Marti. There are palm trees, and there's something going up out of the frame at a diagonal, something fairly big, like a big cable. And there's a guy with TV Marti on his shirt, and he's saying to the tourist, "Oh yeah, that's the balloon. Yeah, we pump the money up there and shoot it over to Cuba from there."
Ed, I think you were going to show that picture of those 11-meter dishes down at the MOT. Is that what you had in your hand?
Yes, and John Ball is in this picture as well. A young John Ball and a Dan Wells is in that picture. And I'm in that picture. And now the name escapes me. Our scientific guy in the office there that you were mentioning earlier, that ran the calculators. Can't think of his name offhand.
I'm sorry, I can't think of Jack's last name, but he was involved with the Telstar satellite, and he had a lot of stories about that, how they were scared to death that satellite was never going to become anything. And he was quite a satellite engineer, but very key to the program, as you were. And so thanks for showing that picture. That was a great installation that you all did.
I was just thinking of another TV Marti story that can be told. Actually, this was printed in the media. I wasn't there, but I did read it in the media like everyone else. It seems that on more than one occasion, this very, very thick, very strong tether broke, and the aerostat got away. Well, in one of these cases, the thing lost buoyancy, lost some of the gas, and started sinking down just over the water. Well, there was a small fishing boat that saw this thing, figured out what it was of some value, and snagged it, thinking they're going to take it back and maybe get a reward or get a bounty for returning it, tying it off to their boat pretty thoroughly. Well, this was early in the morning when they spotted it. So they start going back to shore with it. And of course, the sun hits the aerostat, hits the balloon. The gas starts to expand. It gains buoyancy. It lifts the boat completely out of the water. They're hanging there by the tether. So they had to get on the radio, call Mayday, Mayday. The Coast Guard comes out and shoots down the balloon and drops the boat. True story.
That's really great. That's a great story, James.
I wasn't there, thank God.
Again,
I got involved in TV Marti early on. I remember reviewing drawings. Believe it or not, the contractor, even at that point in time, was General Electric, which I found very interesting, going over these General Electric system and schematic drawings for the project. But yeah, they were still a player in television systems at that point in time. But they actually had a diesel generator on board this thing. I forget how many kilowatts, because obviously, as high as this thing had to be, you would have tremendous copper losses in trying to get power up from the ground. So they actually had to generate their own power up there on the aerostat to run the transponder, so to speak, the receiver and the transmitter.
Yeah, James, that balloon used to show up on all the FAA sectionals with warnings all over the thing saying, "Stay away. This is a tethered device at 10,000 feet, and you don't want to hit it with your wing."
Yeah, you can imagine the losses there in running AC over 10,000 foot extension cord.
Sure, it was high voltage.
Yeah, no, so that's why they had the diesel generator on board.
Well, folks, this has been a fascinating discussion. I just want to say hi to John Turner and George Lemaster, because we spent a bunch of time in Las Vegas not that long ago at the NAB convention, and it was very successful. We were sharing space with the Museum of Broadcast Technology out of Woonsocket, Rhode Island. That's Paul Beck and Tom Sprague, who many of you know. And it was a great week, and I think it was really a terrific thing. We had a couple of Norelco PC-70s there that worked. Now, none of this stuff went by satellite and or AT&T long line, so it's kind of off the subject, but I just want to say hi to everybody, and I got to go. So we'll have a great evening, everyone.
It was fun to catch up with you, Chuck. We had a good time last week. Take it
It
easy.
really was. I had a great time. It was fantastic. We'll have to do it again.
Always next year, 101st show.
Well, you're several more than me, but anyway, more power to us.
There were a lot of folks came by. It was a lot of fun talking to people. Either they said, gee, these were built before I was born, or I had a lot of time experience working on them myself. So it was great to have people come up and try them out. And fortunately, they stayed working for the whole show, just turned them on and they ran. So we were glad we didn't have any real problems for a 1966 camera.
George, you found all the capacitors.
Well, I don't know if I found enough of them, I guess. So we didn't have anything blow up or fail. I see Ed's got his, go ahead, Chuck. I
was just going to say, I know that George put in a ton of time. Hey, there was an image orthicon tube. I'm sorry, an iconoscope tube, rather.
Yes.
Just blast across my screen.
In 1850.
Yep.
Yep, sure is. That was before my time, too.
Yeah.
Yeah, before mine, too. But, they were common in film chains, even in the 50s and stuff. Because
TK20, yeah.
Well, if you had a 1,000-watt light bulb, that was about enough to get a picture out of one of the things.
Yeah, they were used in the 60s.
Luckily, I didn't have to do that. But
well, it was cheap to operate. You could leave an image up on them all day long; they wouldn't really burn, and the tube lasted forever. So you could leave a slide or something. At a place I worked, they would leave the what they called a ballop machine. It would say, please stand by, or station ID. And they just leave it up all the time on that old TK20 chain until they finally took it out. But they definitely worked. The trouble was every time they changed the picture, you had to run over and shade get the shading correct, because the electrons move all around on that plate in there when you change the image on it. So it causes tremendous shading. And that was why people that operate video cameras, I think to this day, are called shaders.
Larry Will just restored a TK20, George. He's got one up in Pennsylvania there.
Who did? Oh, Larry's had one for a long time. And Tom Sprague at the Museum of Broadcast Technology bought one and restored it. His work's good. And so they can certainly be made to work. And here they go, all these years.
Where those PC-70s wind up going? And they go down to Chuck, or they go back to Woonsocket? Back
to Woonsocket.
Yeah.
I think George has too much of his time invested in them for them to make a detour somewhere. But they worked really great. They actually did. One of the funny things is people kept asking, how many pixels is it?
Yeah. Yeah, and why is there a light in the back of these yoke assemblies? Which is the filament
too. Why is that so bright? Is that the filament?
Where's the image sensor in this thing? That's quite an interesting. The thing that is amazing to me about those cameras is that the Plumicons have held up after all these years. They actually, and the ones that are in those cameras are EEV, English electric valve tubes. And yeah, Ledicons, and I was really amazed that they are still working. Some of the others leading brands back at the museum did not survive this time. One of them, they kind of look like the crater, craters on the moon or something. But those those ones that are in that those cameras today, they've got some shading problems, but they're not too shabby.
No, they worked amazingly well. Really, I was really impressed.
The museum has one more camera, which, well, they've got two more PC70 CCUs that I've brought up, and one of them is a dual cable and it's connected to a PC60 head that came out of ABC Hollywood, Lawrence Welk Studios. So that one is, yeah, it's got one right there with the mask on the end of it. What brand is that, Ed? An Amprex?
Yep.
Yeah, an Amprex XQ. Yeah, that's a field mesh tube. And yeah, so one of the cameras up there that's operating, we didn't bring it to the show because we've only got one set of dual cables, and we were scared to death something would happen to that, and then we'd be out of business because they are unobtainium. And but anyway, the other one is that they've still got at the museum operating is a 60, which came out. It was shown at NAB in 1965, and ABC bought some number of them, as it did ACBS. John Turner would know the history on them, but anyway, they have a few heads, and I put one complete head together, and was able to obtain a PC70 CCU that was dual cable, so we could bring up that so-called Lawrence Welk camera. And they have another one yet that is a film chain PC70, which is a little kind of a rare bird, but it works also. The one we don't have, and maybe somebody out there can find one, is we have a PCP70, which is the portable version of that PC70. We don't have a manual on it, and it's got preamp problems and all kinds of things. And if anybody ever runs across a PCP70 manual, we'd love to talk to you.
Nobody showed up at the show that had one, huh?
No, no one at the show had one. There's a few, maybe they said they'd take a look. I had one guy come up and talk to me. He was a nice fellow. I forget his name right off, but he had been a field service PC70 guy for Philips, and he told me that when they quit making, they moved their building, they discarded all the PC70 and PCP70 product pieces. They had a room full of modules, brand new in the box, and all that sort of thing, and all the manuals. So they dumpstered it, and he and another person dumpster dived and took them all out and took them to his garage and put them away. And he kept them for 2 or 3 years. Then he moved to California, and no one had any interest in them. So they all went back in the dumpster.
I think the fellow that I was thinking of was Bill Sturkey. I don't know if you know him.
Yeah, I've talked to Bill Sturkey, and he lives in Oklahoma now, and nice fellow. But he told me he just didn't remember a thing about it, and he doesn't have any information on them anymore. But he was another one that we tracked down and tried to former field service person. Somebody brought up here about the PCP90 that we've got. The museum has a PCP90, and we have not tried to bring that up. Those were hard to make work when they were new. But right, Sean, I've worked with them at NBC, and they were they were an issue. So that was a smaller camera yet, with smaller tubes, and more portable. You still had to be a gorilla to carry one of those things, and the backpack. And so the PCP90, we've got manuals and got a camera, and that and a good amount of the accessories for it. Not all, but that's a future project, I guess. That camera would work on microwave or triax or yeah, I guess that was the two options, but mostly they'd use them down on the sidelines on the football games and things like that, or they would just run them directly into a portable quad tape recorder, which another gorilla would carry on his back. They were so big. VR3000.
James, you showed a link to WBKB at the Lincoln Tower in Chicago. I've just been trying to find out if that building still exists and where it was. Do you have any idea?
Really don't have any other information than what you saw in that ad, which ran in Broadcasting Magazine. Again, GE was touting what they could do with, building microwave. A lot of companies got involved in building microwave. Certainly RCA, GE of necessity to bring in the network signals from New York. Of course, Raytheon was building microwave. I think Linkert was building microwave, all ostensibly for broadcast purposes. But I really, don't know anything beyond that link from South Bend into Chicago, other than what you saw in that ad. There's a little bit of a write-up in the magazine about it, but they had been using it that football season, the fall of 1947. But other than that, I know nothing about what became of it. But the link, the relay points are specified in that little pictorial drawing of the linkage.
Yeah, there's an online article about WBKB in the late 40s building their transmitter tower, which when finished will be taller than almost all the downtown buildings.
Mm-hmm.
I thought that was a laugh.
Yeah. And I found it interesting anecdotally that because there was a great concern that they were just not going to have enough video quality left after going through all of these hops from New York to California, and they may well have to move the network origination centers to Chicago. Of course, that never happened. I was talking with George about that earlier today, and George, you said ABC was prepared to do that, or it laid some groundwork for that.
I'm sorry, I might have missed that. John Turner could probably tell us here. Like you're talking about how Burbank had their time zone delay. NBC had their time zone delay in Burbank, and I thought ABC had their time zone delay in Chicago. Is that true, John?
And that's my understanding, but I think it wasn't there all the time. I think they moved it around depending on the technology that they had at the time. I know at the end of the line there for analog TV, they did a lot of it in New York City.
That was PBS's was right there in Washington, D.C. They had about 30 tape machines, and that was how they did their time zone delay over the satellites.
Yeah. Hey, Ed, I've got one of those AVR1s working.
Oh, very good. Those were remarkable machines, totally automatic. All you had to do was throw a tape at it. It would thread itself, set itself up, cue itself up, and play on schedule. They were quite amazing.
Oh, when I got the one I have, it was in rough shape. It was missing most of the boards, and it had rust from the fire all over it.
Yeah, that was a particularly bad situation. But you know who came to our rescue on that was ABC. They brought some mobile vehicles in within days, and we were back on the air with running it everything from the MOT. We had cars running back and forth between the library and the tape library and the MOT site, and playing tapes back as fast as we could get them going. It was an amazing technical achievement. I want to say again to James, to thank you very much for a really outstanding presentation. I enjoyed every minute of it, and a lot of the information about the AT&T networks and the cooperation that they had, as you indicated, with the broadcasters was really very good and very solid. Like you said, everybody had a PL line directly from their individual station to the operations center, the AT&T, and they would do the switching real time right there, pulling plugs, flipping switches. As individual stations were switching networks and switching sources, the AT&T guys were there taking care of it.
Right. And what blew me away, again, being, first hop out of New York, so to speak, going east, they like to keep the circuit open even when ABC was not feeding programming. So generally they would put up another station that was coming in somewhere, another feed coming in, just to keep live video on this rather than putting up bars and burning in the monitors. And I know they carried a lot of, they transmitted to us a lot of WABC, of course, the local affiliate there in New York's programming. And one day I had not been in Connecticut that long, and I come from a small town in Arkansas. I'm probably a little strange in more respects than one, but I developed a love for grand opera early on, listening to the Texaco Metropolitan Opera broadcasts on Saturday afternoons. And my hero was Milton Cross. And I had not been at the television station in Connecticut that long, and ABC was not transmitting. I saw something there. I saw a local Channel 7 ID from New York, and I turned the audio up on the monitor, and there's Milton Cross doing a local station break for Channel 7. It just blew me away.
There's one thing I'm curious about in terms of network interconnects is how long into the 70s did broadcasters rely on off-air interconnect, especially on an intermittent basis? I remember what used to be WSVA TV, Channel 3 in Harrisonburg, which I could receive over in the Virginia Hills area of Fairfax County, if you're familiar with that area off of Telegraph Road and Suicide Circle. They were nominally an ABC affiliate, but they depended upon WRC to get the Galloping Gourmet. And one morning, something went wrong with the tape at WRC, and you had the WRC Please Stand By slide on Channel 3 for a long time until WRC came up with something. And I was wondering, what about the cities where AT&T didn't go? How long did, shall we say, off-air interconnect last? Or you have any information on that?
Well, in most places you couldn't do an off-air interconnect because you weren't close enough to anybody that was connected to the net. So the only recourse you had, again, this was before videotape, were the Kinescope recordings that the networks would ship out. That was it. I know our first local station, Texarkana, 200 miles from the nearest VHF station, that was in Dallas. So yeah, if you got anything at all, it was not going to be anywhere near even 85% reliable. So yeah, we watched till it was several years. They went on in late '53, and I don't think that AT&T long lines reached Texarkana until maybe 57 or 58, because I remember through grade school once in a while watching Christmas shows well into January because of just the latency there and getting these Kinescopes bicycle from one station to another, and they'd put them up and play them. Now, film was a very big part of early television. It had to be. But yeah, I don't think off-air pickup would have been any sort of a possibility whatsoever because they were so far away from a VHF station. I mean, if you got a signal that far away, the homeowner might as well put up a tall antenna, high gain antenna, and do it himself without the middleman. In Arkansas, I mentioned we did build our own 4-hop microwave, 7-jig microwave from Little Rock up to Fayetteville because it was just going to be ungodly expensive in construction cost and hourly charges for AT&T to do this. So we did this, and the first hop out was in a little cow pasture in a town of maybe 20 people. I think it's counting the dogs and the cows and the ticks and everything else, called Boston, Arkansas. And it was far enough away from Fayetteville, but close enough to Little Rock so we could get a Little Rock signal off the air if we were 100 feet up on the microwave tower with a cut channel Yagi. So we built the net backwards. We started picking Channel 4 in Little Rock up the NBC affiliate. And the next link was further down. It crossed the Arkansas River. Then there was another link. So we 4 links. That's how it went. But every link we're getting closer to Little Rock. We are picking them up off the air till we get there to their transmitter site. And then we're taking their transmitter feed, which obviously was not the best thing because we got all of their IDs and information supered in. So the next and the last, link was the link between downtown Little Rock, where AT&T long lines came into building with NBC, and up to the mountain. And that way we got our clean feed. But yeah, we did pick up off the air just by necessity so we could operate and have an NBC feed for the first, I guess, 6-8 months till this network, microwave intercity network, if you want to call it that, was constructed. One link at a time. It was very slow.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. I think it's it's here at 10:09. I think I'm going to pull the plug. I got to get up early and go down the road tomorrow to the country house. I got to actually get up early first to do some hamming. I've got an early net I want to do. So it's been pleasurable. Thanks for having me, and hope you get to do this again someday.
Thanks very much. Great presentation.
Thank you.
Yeah. Great stuff.
Thanks much.
This is like watching a little white dot go